Had a preacher tell me once to never preach a sermon over 30 minutes until you're over 30. Well, I turned 30 Tuesday, so you might want to start getting a little comfortable. No, I'm joking. Nellie told me not to tell that last week, because if I told that last week, then nobody would have showed up this week, so thought I'd hold off on that. We're starting a new sermon series today that we've entitled Jesus Is. And over the past couple of weeks, I asked you to fill out a piece of paper that says Jesus is blank, and say what Jesus is to you. Some of the things that you all wrote was that Jesus is grace. Jesus is my all in all, that he's truth. He's my role model. He's understanding. Jesus is my hero, my provider, my savior. But one of my favorites is probably, it just simply said, Jesus is exclamation point. That's all it said. In Matthew chapter 16, Jesus asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" It seems that Jesus knew that there was a lot of speculations out there about who he was, just like they are today. Some people today will say that Jesus is a liar, or Jesus is a fairy tale, or Jesus is a great moral teacher and a great man, but he is not the only way. One preacher told how he was on a flight and he was reading a book, and the man sitting next to him noticed that it was a book about Jesus, and he looked at him and he says, "Jesus is nothing more than a magician." He compared him to somebody like David Blaine. The preacher sat there and thought for a little bit. He says, "Well, my Sunday school teacher never taught me that Jesus pulled rabbits out of hats or did card tricks." But Jesus didn't leave the question at, "Who do people say that I am?" He made it a little bit more personal. And he says, "Who do you say that I am?" This is one of the most important questions that we could ever answer. I remember when I had to decide who I thought Jesus was, or who he was to me. I could have said that he was just make-believe, like so many people today says. But to do so would deny so much of recorded human history, both Christian and secular. I could have believed that he is irrelevant, like many people today do. But to do so would deny the fact that nothing has shaped Western civilization more than Jesus Christ. So when I think about who Jesus is, one of the first words that comes to my mind is Jesus is love. One of the greatest examples we get of that is from John chapter 5. John 5, starting with verse 2, it says, "Now there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool in Aramaic called Bethesda, which has 5 roof colonnades." Now, before you start to think about this pool, like a backyard pool that you would see, put that picture out of your mind, because this pool was the size of 2 football fields put together. It was a massive structure. Then in verse 3 it says, "In these lay a multitude of invalids, blind, lame, and paralyzed. One man was there who had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had already been there a long time, he said to him, 'Do you want to be healed?'" Now, doesn't that sound like an obvious question? This man has been an invalid for 38 years. Of course I want to be healed. So you would think when Jesus asked that question that his immediate response would say, of course I do. Of course I want to be healed. Of course I want to be made well. But listen to what he says. In verse 7 it says, "The sick man answered him, 'Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up, and while I am going, another steps down before me.'" Now, this is a first century belief that the pool had special healing powers, and the first person in, after the water was stirred by the springs underneath it, would be healed. Now, you could imagine that the first people into the pool is probably somebody that's got a headache, or maybe a stomach ache, or a hangnail, or something like that, but somebody that's lame, that can't walk, that can't get up, the likelihood that they would ever make it is very slim. Now, this may sound pretty irrational to us, but people today do the same thing. Just stay up late tonight with your remote and see preacher after preacher selling healing water from the River Jordan. Just drink this and your diabetes will go away. Or the healing blankets. Just wrap yourself up in this and your cancer will be gone tomorrow. Millions of people will spend millions of dollars on things like these. Why? Well, there's something inside of all of us that wants to be well. None of us wants to be unwell. So you think that this man's answer would have been a yes. But instead he says something like, I'm just not fast enough. There's a lot of people who wants to hang out by the pool. They come to church, but they never really want to change. And I think the reason that they don't want to change is because they're afraid to accept reality. Certain people get used to living a certain way so long that they don't want to change it, even if it would be for the better. Heard a story this week of a 34-year-old woman who had a 300-pound tumor removed. And she was asked, are you relieved? She says, you just have no idea. They said, well, why didn't you do something about it sooner? And I think her reply is very revealing. She said, I just assumed that with time it would either get better or it'd go away. You may know some people like that. That may even be you. With time, my marriage will get better. With time, my job, it's got to get better. But avoiding reality really doesn't change reality. Many of you may have seen the TV show Hoarders. Now, I've got to say, Nellie's pretty much the exact opposite. If it's not been used in about a year, she'll get rid of it. She got rid of about 3 huge black trash bags worth of my clothes because I didn't wear it enough. No grudges here at all. But on the TV show Hoarders, one of the amazing things is that clutter doesn't just happen overnight. And one of the most revealing parts of the TV show is when they invite somebody from the outside to come into their home. Because on the outside, everything looks fine. Looks like every other home. But it's not until you go inside that you see all of this clutter. And the response is usually always the same. The jaw would just drop to the floor, and it would be easy for us to sit back in our recliners, point fingers, and judge. But the truth is, in my life, in my heart, there's clutter. Over time, I've accumulated some bad things, some bad memories, some bad thoughts, some bad ideas. Sometimes it becomes difficult for me to navigate my way through this evil world that God has called me to live in. And I could easily dismiss the damage that was done to my heart and just say, well, with time it will get better. And I think that's why we've got to ask the question today, what is that 300-pound spiritual tumor that's inside of you? It may look different for each and every one of us, but it's choking the life out of us. Whatever changes that you want to make in your life, Jesus wants to help. So let him help. This guy, for 38 years, he believed a lie. And we do the same. It's too late for me. I'm too sinful. I'm too old. I'm too stuck in my ways. I'm too this or that. But with love, it's never too late. Love never asks the question, why did you or how could you? Instead, love always asks the question, do you want to get well? And a lot of people struggle with that question. They're afraid to accept the current reality that they're in. Came across this picture during my study this week. His name is Benicio, and he was 53 years old when this picture was taken. And he suffers from a rare genetic disease called neurofibromatosis. It's where painful tumors will spread all over his body. It just won't stop. Nobody will look at him. Nobody will talk to him. He's an ignored man. So when the Pope came to his hometown, he pushed past the security, he broke down the barricades, and he fell at the Pope's feet. And to his surprise, the Pope picked him up. He embraced him, and he actually did something that nobody had done for a long time. He put his hands on his face. Vinicio was asked, how did it feel to be accepted after years of people being terrified of you, people not even wanting to look at you? And he said, it felt like love. His actual quote was, I felt only love. I read that and I thought, man, isn't that a goal? What if when people walked through the doors of our church, they felt only love? You know, if you don't feel loved, it's probably one of two reasons. Your insecurity or our insensitivity. And if it's our insensitivity, then I'll say, I'm sorry. Because Jesus does love you. He really does. And what if in your life you didn't feel any condemnation anymore? What if you didn't feel any judgment? What if you didn't feel any pressure to keep up or to measure up? What if all we felt was love? Because we are loved. You see, the man by the pool, Jesus didn't ask him a series of qualifying questions. Jesus didn't say to him, fill out this application, and once you're done with it, I'll heal you. Jesus didn't say, if you'll sow some financial seed, I will bless you with a miracle. No, he loved him where he was, as he was. Every single one of us needs to be loved. And when you're not loved daily and deeply, you will manipulate every relationship in your life to get the love from other people. Every angry person is an unloved person. Every jealous person is an unloved person. And every unloved person is afraid. Whatever emotions come out of that, it's just a symptom of a greater issue that we call fear. There's an elementary school teacher who told the story about Douglas. Douglas's mom dropped him off on the first day of kindergarten, and she didn't show up at the end of the day to pick him up. And she hasn't been home since. Every day when Douglas would walk to the cafeteria for lunch, the principal would stop him, take him out of the line, take him into the office, and together they would sit down and they would call his dad. And every day, Douglas asked his dad the same question. He said, Dad, are you going to pick me up today? Douglas is afraid, and rightfully so. One of the people in his life that should have ran to him ran away from him. And you know, I'm a lot like Douglas, because I need reassurance every single day. I need to know that my Father is going to come and get me. That I'm not stuck here, that I'm not abandoned to this world that's filled with violence and terrorism, child abuse and abductions. You know, the reason I think so many people struggle with answering the question that Jesus wants to ask us, do you want to get well? Is not only because we're afraid to accept reality, but also because we're afraid to change reality. Here's what I mean. This man has been sick for 38 years of his life. All he has known in his life is a life of inaction, sitting, sleeping, immobility. And then Jesus shows up one day, and he says to the man, get up, take up your bed and walk. There's 3 action words back to back: get up, take up, and walk. When all you've known is inaction, a challenge to action can be extremely scary. This is why 2 psychiatrists in their book, Happiness is a Choice, they show us how to move from inaction to action with these words. They say, as psychiatrists, we cringe whenever Christian patients use the word, I can't, and I've tried. Any good psychiatrist knows that I can't and I've tried are merely lame excuses. We insist that our patients stop saying can't and say won't instead. And if you go on to read their books, they say that if a patient comes in and they say, I just can't get along with my wife, they will say, no, you need to rephrase that. You won't get along with your wife. I just can't stop spending money. I just can't stop eating food. No, you won't. And they said with research that if you can get a person to change their can'ts to won't, then that person will stop making excuses and start taking action. The Bible tells us that there has to be an exchange that happens. We need to lay down our old life and take up our new life. You can't have them both. Remember, Jesus says, do you want to get well? If you want to get well, then he wants to help. Jesus loves you because he sees you the way that God intended you to be. Psychologists have a phrase for this. They call it the looking glass theory. And it basically just says you become what the most important person in your life thinks that you are. And that could be really, really good, or that could be really, really bad. Some of us have really good people in our life who wants to pick us up. Others of us have people in our life who wants to bring us down and pull us down. And I just want to remind you that everywhere Jesus was, whether he was in the foreground or the background, he did the exact same thing. He was pro-people. He cheered them on. He picked them up. People who had been pushed down. And you just need to be reminded today that you will have those people in your life who just wants to push you down and keep you down. And sadly, I hate to admit it, some of them might even be religious. Some of them might even claim to be speaking for God. It was true for this man, because he picked up his mat, he walked out of the pool area, but listen to what happened next. Listen to what they say to him. In verse 9 it says, and at once the man was healed, and he took up his bed and he walked. Now that day was the Sabbath. Now every time you read that day was the Sabbath, it's an uh-oh moment. What's going to happen next? Now that day was the Sabbath. So the Jews said to the man who had been healed, it is the Sabbath, and it is not lawful for you to take up your bed. They didn't even notice the miracle. That this man was lame for 38 years. He couldn't get up, that Jesus had healed him. They didn't say that this is a miracle, that God has blessed you. No, what they wanted to point out is it's not lawful for you to carry your bed. Even if he was healed, it doesn't matter. Maybe you've experienced something like that in your own life. I think, or at least I hope, that religious people are well-intended, at least most of the time, but they have a hard time striking the balance between truth and love. Matter of fact, they usually tip more on the truth side rather than the love. There's a theologian by the name of John Stott who describes the danger of that in these words. He says, our love grows soft if it is not strengthened by truth. And our truth grows hard if it's not softened by love. I bet if you were to close your eyes, each and every one of you can picture somebody in your life that loves you, but struggles to speak truth to you. And my guess is you can close your eyes and you can also picture people who can speak truth to you, but has a real problem loving you. You see, Jesus wants to strike that perfect balance between truth and love in your life. The truth is that if you're led him, he's going to find things in your life that you need to change. And you already know that. You want to change them yourself. But my guess is that you're just going to say to him, I don't know how, or I can't. And here's the wonderful part. Because that's where Jesus goes, but I can. And with my power that's available to you, you can too. See, the reason why I am so confident of filling in the blank with Jesus is love is because Jesus is the only person in my life who has never given up on me. He's the only one who has never thrown in the towel. And I have given him more than enough reasons to quit. But he continues to come back, continues to love me. And here's the dilemma that I'm in. In my mind, I go through those days that because of my sin, I think that there's no way that he could love me anymore. But that's a lie. And then there's other days that my male ego gets in the way, and I think, well, I just don't need anybody to love me. And that's a lie too. You know, sometimes I think that I've got it all together, but then I fail and fall every time. My marriage, just ask my wife. Leading a church, you know. And Jesus is in the corner all the time going, do you want help? I've got it if you need it. And you know, we all need to be loved. And I believe that Jesus is in your corner too. And he's saying, do you want help? Do you want to feel loved? Do you want to get well? Because I'm here. I will help change your inaction to action. I will help remove that spiritual tumor that's in your life that's choking the life out of you. All you have to do is ask. So my question to you is, will you ask? So come now as we stand and sing.